hardly any left.
Welcome to the second Blue Knob Farmers Market Fermentation Festival. It's a fantastic day, particularly for the middle, almost the middle of the wet season. You picked the right day, James. The Blue Knob Farmers Market runs every Saturday from 8:30 onwards, whether it's raining or not. So please come out to the market as well and support the local growers. And also while you're here, check out the gallery. That's a local gallery run by local artists. The event today is totally free. If you'd like to support us, and we'd definitely like your financial support for what we're doing here and for the costs of putting on this event. Now the format today, we'll have two keynote speakers speaking for about 30 minutes each. But other than that, we've got about 9 other speakers speaking just for 10 or 15 minutes. Now the idea is they can't give you all they know about in that time. But the idea is to give you a quick idea and a quick introduction to a whole range of people about what they're doing, what they're fermenting, what they're trying out, all those kinds of things. So the idea is to do networking, to talk to them afterwards, to talk to other people, have discussions, connections, write down people's phone numbers, emails. The idea is to produce a ferment of ideas and inspirations from the day. Okay. So the first keynote speaker for today is Jean Martinez. She's worked around food in one way or another for about 20 years. And I was reading a very significant event for her was traveling to New York to do the training for organic and wild foods chef training at the Natural Gourmet Cooking School in New York. A very interesting cooking school. Hardly any like it in the world. She runs classes to pass on this information that she's learnt. And sourdough bread, making cultured butter, wild fermentation. Really applied stuff like how to do whole food breakfasts. Instead of just running out the door with your Kellogg's cornflakes, have something nutritious that's pretty easy to make. Also the same with making kids' lunches, those kind of things. Gluten-free sourdough, I'm particularly interested in gluten-free sourdough. Those are a bit of an idea of her classes. She's got a vision to teach and inspire everyone to learn basic food skills, basic nutritional food skills, so that you can nurture yourself and the family and the planet, instead of what we're eating being decided by marketing and advertising propaganda. As I said, her website and Facebook site are in this little booklet. And and without further ado, I'll hand it over to Jean. Thank you. Please welcome her to the microphone.
I think that's the best introduction I've ever had. Thank you. Very comprehensive. So I've been asked here today to talk to you about the history and benefits of fermented foods. Hopefully I don't bore you all silly. It's for me it's a deeply fascinating area, and fermented foods is something that I've come into in the past sort of 5-6 years, and my journey began with teaching myself fermented foods, and then along the way I met other people that were doing it and gathered stories and learned from what they did, and we share. One of the fantastic things about anything to do with food, but in particular fermentation, is these are skills that we can share with each other. And that's why I'm so excited to be here today, and that's why I was so excited to come as a visitor last year and sat just over there and got to listen to Sandor and be inspired by him. And the recipe that I'm doing, the ferment that I'm making today in my demo, is very much inspired by the ferment that Sandor did last year. So thank you. So fermented foods, believe it or not, have been enjoyed for thousands of years by traditional societies across the globe, be it for fresh dairy, grain, legumes, meat, vegetables and fruits. In our post-industrial revolution world, fermented and lacto-fermented foods had risked being left behind as we lost our relationship with them and the role that they played in a nourishing diet. Cold storage, canning, vinegar pickling and hybridised foods designed for a long shelf life now dominate, where we previously relied on this natural form of food preservation to put away the harvest of fresh produce, thereby preserving critical nutrients and enzymes and providing a rich store of beneficial bacteria for our bellies. Along the way, many of us have also lost the familiarity with these often nuanced foods and their flavours, These are sour preparations a lot of the time, and we live in a world obsessed with the cheap thrill of processed foods which are loaded with refined sugar, salt and dodgy fats. The knowledge and art of fermentation hasn't been lost, and now's the time for the revival of these foods and learning the art of bringing it back into our everyday lives. They are truly very, very easy to do, and often it's just a leap of faith to be able to start making them. The earliest records of fermentation are said to date back as far as 7000 BC in the Fertile Crescent, and nearly every civilization since has at least one fermented food in its culinary heritage. Records indicate that fermentation was practiced in Iran, 5400 BC, with winemaking; in Babylon, 5000 BC, with milk fermentation; in China, 4000 BC, with lacto-fermented cabbage; and in Egypt, around 3000 BC, although I've read that it's even older than that, with leaven to raise sourdough. Fermented foods also have religious significance in Judaism and Christianity, and the Greeks deemed this ancient process alchemy due to the magical transformations that occurred during fermentation. The earliest form of lactic acid fermentation is believed to have been milk fermented into yogurt, kefir, cheeses and buttermilk. Raw milk, which is unpasteurised, sours quite rapidly, so if anybody has experience with raw milk, they'll be quite intimate with this process. Due to the natural fermentation conducted by the lactic acid bacteria. The bacteria convert lactose, the milk sugar, into lactic acid, which serves as a preservative, and lactic acid is also a natural antibiotic that keeps spoiling or putrefying organisms away from the naturally preserved foods that contain it. Our ancient voyagers, such as the Roman Emperor Tiberius in the 1st century through to James Cook in the late 18th century, relied on sauerkraut and fermented foods to protect their crews from certain intestinal infections and diseases such as scurvy and caused by vitamin C deficiency. Fermentation preserves, improves nutrition, adds flavour to many foods including cheese, sourdough bread, olives, cured meats, coffee, chocolate, some teas, vinegar and alcoholic drinks. So what is the process? What goes on in fermentation? It's an anaerobic process whereby lactic acid bacteria that's indigenous, that's on the surface of everything, on our bodies, on the food that we buy, on the surface of grains, on flesh and fruit and leaves. And many lactobacillus species and some yeasts convert sugar and starches into lactic acid, which acts as a preservative. Salt plays a pivotal role in traditional fermentation by creating conditions that are favoured by the lactic acid bacteria, preventing the growth of pathogenic microorganisms, pulling water and nutrients from the substrate, for example cabbage, and adding flavour. Fermentation doesn't just encompass one basic process. It's nearly as diverse as the range of foods it produces, which you'll see today, everything from krauts through to tempeh, fermented meats and fermented dairy. The flavours and textures are quite varied. While there's quite a few types of actual fermentation, lacto-fermentation provides the most health benefits. So what are these benefits to our bodies and to us? In contrast to other more well-known food preservation techniques such as vinegar preserving or freezing foods or drying foods out, although that's not a great example, the drying foods, because that still preserves nutrition. Lactofermentation enhances food's nutritional value by preserving. It doesn't involve high heat. The vitamins and enzymes present in the food are protected. Beyond simply maintaining the vitamin content of raw foods, the process of fermentation can also create new vitamins, specifically B vitamins and vitamin K2, as well as some types of enzymes. Furthermore, because the lactobacilli increase the digestibility of vegetables by providing their own natural enzymes, our bodies don't have to completely rely on our digestive system to metabolize the foods. You might read, when you consult Dr. Google on the art of fermentation, you'll find that the discussions are wide and varied and often contradictory. I've seen reports on the internet that fermenting foods can increase vitamin C by up to 200%. That's rubbish. It's not a miracle. You can't grow vitamin C in a ferment, but you can grow B vitamins, and you can preserve the nutrition that's in the food already when you ferment it. This is why we aim to ferment foods that are grown locally, that are harvested locally, that are fresh and in season and at their peak of nutritional value. Lactofermentation or fermented foods helps your body to digest carbohydrates. It breaks down certain types of carbohydrates that can be difficult to digest, such as the carbohydrates in cabbage, making it a better eating experience, not so gassy. Another example is the lactose broken down in milk during fermentation, rendering it much easier to digest. It can help to assist in the reduction of sugar cravings when consumed regularly. It's implicated in food safety around the world. In some countries, traditional ferments have a protective effect on the foods that are fermenting, or render them more digestible where once they would not have been. In Africa, there is a food called gari, and that's made from cassava, which has natural cyanides in it. So if it's not properly fermented, it can be poisonous to eat. Same in Tanzania. They have a fermented gruel called togwa that's been found to protect against foodborne illnesses. So this is that bacterial sort of ingestion of beneficial bacteria, creating a protective effect in the body. And lastly, and for me most importantly, and for many of you here, the reason that a lot of us find fermented foods and there's a resurgence in interest in them is that there's a great amount of discussion now about the benefits of consuming naturally fermented foods and laying down that bacteria in our gut to heal problems that we have, to heal medical issues, to improve our digestion, but also to work on diseases that we're told through modern medicine just have to be managed and can't actually be healed. So these are things such as allergies, asthma, skin issues such as eczema, psoriasis, thank you. And there's also a group of people that absolutely believe that fermented foods play a role in helping you with your sense of well-being and your mental health and preventing cancer. One of my favourite books is Natasha Campbell-McBride's Gut and Psychology Syndrome, and she is a British doctor who's worked with healing her son's autism, and she believes that through a diet of elimination as well as adding fermented foods back in, she was able to heal her son's autism and make his life much better, obviously. So the beneficial bacteria in the digestive tract are crucial to a properly functioning immune system. These foods lay down beneficial microorganisms in the digestive tract which promote the growth of healthy digestive flora throughout the intestine. This supports optimum metabolism of cholesterol, assists to control glucose levels in the blood, and assists in creating healthy bowel movements. Lactobacilli increase the digestibility of vegetables by providing their own natural enzymes so that our bodies do not have to completely rely on our digestive system to metabolize foods. A few more things that I love about fermented foods. It's a frugal art, so you don't have to have a lot of money. You can come to your market, you can gather vegetables, and you can go home with some salt and a nice clean jar and a knife and a chopping board and make your own ferment. I'll be making a market ferment today. Everything except the salt is from here. You don't need a lot of equipment. I've mentioned that it's cheap. It allows for imprecision. So no batch is like the last one, and the ingredients that you use you can tweak to your favourite taste, or you can leave things out like spicy, like chili if your family doesn't like that, and you can make a small batch with chili if you like it. You can just vary and riff on it as much as you like. It can improve the flavour of foods, but there's foods that don't ferment very well. I'll throw a few out there. I always mention choco. Horrible. I've tried. There's not much redeeming choco though. And some things like kale you wouldn't tend to ferment on their own because they become really strong in ferments. And then other things are a delight and surprise you. Onion and garlic lose their pungency and become very sweet and lovely, and they provide a lot of moisture to a ferment as well. And fermentation allows you to preserve the harvest. So this is part of the traditional food skill of fermentation for people that live in regions where you can't grow greens all year round and you need to access these high vitamin, fibre, enzyme foods throughout the cold months. You can ferment them and eat them then. They're very safe. The process of lacto-fermentation, and specifically vegetables, don't be afraid to try it. It's really easy and it's really hard to stuff up if you follow the basic rules. You're not likely to ever get sick from it. If you've never done it, if you've never eaten them before, go slow. Even today, if you get lots of samples, you might get a bit of a tummy upset the first time you're exposed to eating lots of ferments. That's called dieback, where your belly is telling you that you need these foods, but you need to take it slow. So just keep that in mind. I've had students come away from class and come in the next day on like a 2 and 3 day course and tell me they've spent the night on the loo. I don't see it as a bad thing. They don't either. When you understand what's going on, no, it's not pleasant, but it's your body talking to you, and it's for you to listen. So how's my time going? I've got about 10 minutes. All right, I'm going to do the market kraut. Do you want me to shout, or I can project? It's all right. I've never used a microphone before. I don't know if you can tell. All right, do you want me to?
If you can actually get into the microphone as much as you can.
All right. I've got some samples up here. If, are you, James, or if someone's happy to hand them around? Yeah, sure. This is a very young ferment. I would normally, I've been very busy, which is no excuse at all, but I just keep that in mind when you're eating this. This is not going to be rich with the most sour flavours that you'll find in a ferment that's a little bit older. This is what I'm calling a market kraut at the moment. Now, sorry? What's in it? All right. This one has carrot, corn, spring onion, a tiny bit of cabbage, cauliflower, and radish. I think that's it. I might have missed one. The one that I'm doing today is all picked from the market, so mostly organic, and what I'm putting in it, and this is, the reason for this is purely to demonstrate to you that your vegetable ferments don't have to be cabbage based, and the cabbage, for anybody that has thyroid issues, so cabbage is a goitrogen and it has a suppressing effect on your thyroid. So if you've been told to avoid goitrogenic foods, there's not many people that have, but it is a consideration for some. This is a ferment that you might like to try instead. You might not like cabbage. So later on they're going to do a cabbage ferment, and that cabbage ferment is going to be a dry salted technique. The one that I'm doing today uses a brine. So I have some copies of the recipe. It's more of a technique to hand out, but just for any of you taking notes, to make a brine for fermentation is a little bit more prescriptive than normal fermenting. So you mix up a 5% brine solution, and that gives you about the right salinity for your ferment. You can always muck around with it. You can adjust it to your personal taste. What the salt does in the ferment is it protects the ferment just long enough. It makes an environment that the lactic acid bacteria prefers. Lactic acid bacteria is really happy in salt. Your pathogenic and your putrefying bacteria don't like salt. So that's already an insurance policy for you. And your first insurance policy is adding salt. The second main thing for any vegetable ferment, any lacto-fermented food, and I'm not talking about like the tempeh things that you'll see later on because that's not my area of expertise, but any other lacto-fermented food, you must keep it anaerobic. That is what allows the lacto-fermentation to occur, and the salt gives it a good environment. And then a third insurance policy that you can use, although you don't have to do it because the lactic acid bacteria exists on the surface of everything that I'm putting in this today, is you could use a little bit of juice from your last batch of kraut to give it a kick along, to give it a little start. So what I've got today is a bowl, chopped up radish greens, parsley, spring onion, cauliflower, corn, green beans, ginger, and then I'm going to add my salt brine to it. And the last thing is you've got to keep everything in there weighed down under the brine. So you can do that by folding up a leaf and putting that on top and holding it down somehow with the lid. I've got these little glass weights that I like to use. They're just the lid from old-fashioned canning jars, but you can find them online as well. Did I mention ginger?
What's the ratio of the brine?
The ratio of the brine is a 5% solution. That means to every litre of water, it's 50 grams of salt. The type of salt that you use, although in the world of whole foods, I find it, I choose to use Celtic sea salt. It's a really high mineral salt compared to your refined salts that have all of the minerals extracted out of them. You get a lot more benefit from the sea salt, a true sea salt, but the refined salt will work. It will do the job that you need it to do if that's the only salt you have access to. Does anybody have any questions? So the question was, do you just pop the brine in with this? What I'm doing right now is I'm filling my jar and I'm going to push all my veggies down quite as firm as I can so I can fit as much in, but it also means that when they start to sort of actively ferment, they sort of expand. You get a lot of carbon dioxide coming up. And you'll you'll always in the first 3 days get this quite intense activity. So you need to have your jar as packed in as possible, your veggies rather. And I'm just going to pour the brine over the top of it. And since I've got it on the table right in front of me, I'm going to put about a tablespoon of my sauerkraut juice from my last batch of sauerkraut in. And that's just going to add the lactic acid bacteria that's already sort of going for it from the last batch. What this will take about, you probably wouldn't start eating it normally before about 4 or 5 days. It really is about personal taste. I've got one in my fridge that's a year old now. Just gets softer. Yeah. Any more questions? Yes, sir.
Have you used seawater for brine?
I haven't. I believe the brine, that the 5% solution is quite close to the salinity of seawater, so I'd love to. I don't live anywhere near the ocean. It would make a lot more sense than rehydrating sea salt. Yep. Is it good to put a bit extra from the last batch, a bit of the sauerkraut juice? Honestly, if you have a batch of, it's entirely unnecessary, but what it does is it just sort of gives it a jump start. So some people use whey, which was popularised by Sally Fallon in her book Nourishing Traditions. At that time, she didn't have a lot of reference to traditional fermentation techniques in terms of just winging it. This is a wild ferment. I didn't add any starter of any sort. It's using a little bit of kraut juice from your last batch is a bit like adding a starter to it. Using starters is a whole other topic area. You can use a little bit of whey that you've dripped off of yogurt. You can use a little bit of your last batch of sauerkraut. You could use a little bit of water kefir if you were using that, because that's got up to 30 kinds of yeast and bacteria already growing in it. And you can also buy starter cultures, so you can grow a very specific strain of lactic acid bacteria in there, and that will treat specific issues for you that have been identified in your gut. Sorry? Oh, okay, I'm going to wind up now. We've got lots more people. I can't hog the microphone. As I told Jim, I talked for 6 hours on fermentation yesterday, so I could keep talking. One last question. So during fermentation, it stays out at room temperature. If it's stinky hot, just put a damp cloth over it and keep it in a tray because you will lose juice from it. It will push up and come out in the first few days. Once you're happy with the way that it tastes, and you might never decide to put it in the fridge. This is not like your classic canning technique or vinegar preserving. It will continue to ferment, and you'll have different species of lactic acid bacteria dominating throughout the time that this exists. But I always put it in the fridge once I'm done fermenting, when I'm happy with the flavour, and every ferment takes a different amount of time.
Sorry, just
Yep.
a quick one. Does it matter what kind of vinegar, like is it wine vinegar particularly better, or just
There's no vinegar.
sorry,
Salt. It's all right.
salt and water?
Salt and water. But this is a brined ferment. We'll do a dry salted ferment later, which is just salt. The water's coming from the vegetables in this dry salted ferment. So I want to thank you for listening to me. Enjoy your day. Thank you to Jim and James for organising today. And everyone else.